Hi, good evening. Let's go ahead and start our mosaic demonstration. Um, the moon is full tonight, or very close to it, and I figured it would be a good opportunity to go through the scheduler, or a little bit of the scheduler using the mosaic function. The mosaic function is a very powerful tool. It allows you to take, of course, multiple frames, and then later on you could process it with different processing software such as APP. So let's begin. The first thing we want to do is to create a sequence. Now for this demonstration, I'm going to keep things kind of short. I'm going to make a 240-second exposure. We're going to make only 2 counts per frame. Now of course you would want to do this much more capturing for your mosaic. But I wanted this to kind of go by fast, and doesn't matter if I do 2 or 20, you'll get the idea. You want to set up your camera like you'd normally do for your imaging. In other words, for me, I'm setting up my gain, I'm setting up my offset, I have set up the exposure and the filter, and everything is set up the way I want it. Now the target that I've chosen here is, let me bring this up here, move this back over here, is this target here. This is IC 1396. It's a fairly big nebulosity, and I think it would suit our demo pretty well. Now I don't expect a lot of image for 240 seconds, but at least you'll see typically what you need to go through to set up this mosaic. So that's the target that I'm using. So we want to set up your exposure. This is all set up, and we want to save this exposure. So we want to add the sequence, verify everything, make sure everything is correct, make sure your gain's correct, make sure your guiding deviation's correct, what you want to do, even your focusing limits. Once you've done that and you've created a sequence, then you want to save this sequence, and you want to save the sequence up here in this icon, Save Capture Sequence As. Click on that, and it will prompt you for what directory you want. In this case, I'm doing job sequences, and it's asking me for a file name. Now I like to use some sort of a descriptive file for this, so I'm just going to say IC 1396 underscore 240 underscore 100 for gain, and maybe 10 for offset, and maybe 0C for temperature. I save this sequence, and we're done here. If you click on the scheduler, this is where you're going to schedule the job. So you're going to search for the target, and the target we're going to pick is IC 1396. And I'll just go ahead and type this thing in here and pick the target and hit OK. We also want to set your sequence. So go ahead and open the directory. Go to your job sequence directory. I've kind of preset this up so it automatically goes to this location, but you'll have to work through where you store your job sequences. And I recommend under K-Stars creating a directory called job sequences. Find your sequence you just created for your exposure and highlight that and open. And that is what you want there. Select your profile that you want to use for the evening, and the next thing is the steps. We want to track. I'm not going to focus. I'm going to save a little bit of time here, and I'm not going to focus. I'm going to do an align and guide. So the bare minimum is track, align, and guide. And I do recommend doing focus if you're doing a brand new sequence off the start. Now, the job startup conditions, we want to just say ASAP. Now I did another a job the other night that I knew that the target wasn't at my meridian until 12 o'clock at night. And this is where you could set this up in a time so that your job will start up at a specific time. In this case, we're going to do ASAP. We know that the target is in the sky and it's reachable. Job constraints. This is your altitude. We're setting this, we're checking this. It must remain 15 degrees above the horizon. The moon I'm leaving unchecked. We have a full moon, but you could define constraints regarding moon separation. And this is good so that you don't select a target that's too close to the moon, or you could at least define how close to the moon you want it to be. Weather, we don't have any weather set up here, so I'm leaving that off. And then the only other constraint here is twilight, which we've already met. It is right now 10:39, so we don't have to worry about that. Let's say you're starting up a sequence early. This could be part of your sequence. So even though it's set up for ASAP, if you have twilights turned on, and let's say it's 9 o'clock when you've set up this job, and it will wait until it meets this requirement. The ending sequence or completion conditions, you could repeat for a number of runs. You could repeat until it's terminated. And you can repeat until a specific time. We're just going to select the sequence completion. And after that completion, we could set up our shutdown process if we want to. For this demonstration, I'm just going to say I'm going to go ahead and warm up the CCD and park the mount. Now that brings up another point on your exposure sequence. Make sure if you do have a cooler, set this up ahead of time. And this is where you would do it. You would set up the cooler on, you would set the temperature, you would check where the T is here to force temperature regulation. And everything's set up on this already. I just want to make sure that you're aware that you have a cooler and you're using a cooler, this is where you would set this up. Okay, getting back to our scheduler, everything looks good here as far as constraints and what we want to do to shut down. I don't have any observatory startup procedures. This is useful if you have automation and you want to park your dome or unpark your dome. Unpark the mount, etc. We don't have to worry about that here. Just be aware that you can do it. One of these days, I'd love to fool around with that. Now that we have the sequence here that we want to do, this button here, this is the Mosaic tool. So let's go ahead and hit the Mosaic button. And we want to make sure that the focal length is correct. Okay, and we're going to change the overlap to 15%, and we're going to select a 2x2 grid. You'll see what happens here with the display. And you'll see that it displays what the capturing area is going to be. And the only other thing we need to change is the directory. And the directory we want to use is not this. We want to put it in our standard or my standard directory. It's under K-stars. So as soon as I get here, and we're going to put it in our working directory, and I've already created a directory called Mosaic, and choose that directory. That's where it's going to put the job and the outputs. Once you've done all that, just double check everything and then hit OK. And this will create 4 jobs. Just take a quick look at the jobs and make sure that they're scheduled and everything looks as it should. And the scheduler comes up with scores, and the scores kind of give you an instance. If it's a higher score, it'll be run first type of thing. And I don't know the real rules behind it. Might be an interesting to look into. So once everything has been set up and it looks like it's ready to go, we're going to start our jobs. There's no jobs running right now. I'm going to hit the start button, and we're going to go ahead and see that the scheduler started. I'm going to clear the output here so we could watch as it progresses. It's going to skew to the target. Now, we go over here to the star chart here. Let me move this out of the way. You'll see that it's moved to that first corner, and that's where it's going to do the first alignment. So let's go over to the alignment, and you'll see that it's already started doing the process. And I think based on target is in a reasonable range, so that looks good. Must have already finished that. It's doing something else. What is it doing? Let's go back up to our scheduler. It's actually started the guiding sequence. So it must have already done the alignment. And capture is in process. So it's actually gone through the alignment already and guiding. I haven't been following this. I'm a little tired tonight. And it started the capture. So we'll just let that thing finish. And I don't expect a lot from this because it's just a demo. I'm not sure if I'm going to see any nebulosity or not in this image. I am using a Optolong L enhanced filter, and it seems to work pretty good, but I understand even with a full moon, it's not the filter to use. And it's continuing on with the download or the image capturing, and we'll just go ahead and watch this. All right, we're coming up to the first captured image and probably downloading. And here's the first image. And we did get some nebulosity. So here's the first image. And I think this is the elephant trunk over here. But as you can see, we did capture some pretty good image here, and it's going to capture another image. It's dithering right now, so it's just normal dithering for the next image, and then it'll start up again for the second image. Once the second image is done, then it'll move to the second part of the target. So let me go ahead and pause this here as it's continuing, and I'll unpause it when we get close to the next point where it is finishing up the second image. All right, we're finishing up the second image. And there's that. Now what it's going to do is it's completed the first part 4. Now it's going to part 3. That means it's going to be going over to move the telescope around. And let's take a look at this. It's moved it over to here, which is correct. And let's see, guiding procedure for part 3. So it's going through a calibration, so it will calibrate every part. So once this calibration is completed and it starts guiding, it'll start capturing the next image. All right, we're almost done with the first capture. You can see that it's in a different position, and it's starting the dithering and Once that's done, it'll resume guiding and start capturing the second image. So I'm going to go ahead and pause this again, this recording, and we'll catch back up when we're almost ready to go to the next part. All right, we're doing the final image, part 3. And the next thing it'll do is completed part 3, starting to run part 4. And again, we go over here, we'll notice that it's moved the telescope over to this point, and we're starting again. And one thing I did notice is that the alignment didn't align, and I'm not sure why that's. I remember last time I did this, the alignment was checked and it actually did the alignment. And I'm wondering if, and I ran this again, so I know that this might be an interesting bug, or it might be just adequate too, because you're not really going too far away. It knows how far to move the mount, and it did the initial alignment, so maybe I don't need to be so worried about that. It seems to be working fine, so it's recalibrating again for the next image and doing the drift calibration. Once the calibration is done and then starts the auto guiding, it'll start the sequence of the first image. And it just started. All right, so we could go back over here. Image is starting to capture. And again, I'm going to pause this until the second image gets, when the first image gets displayed, I'll start up and we'll see how it's changed from this current position. All right, we've finished that image. It's downloading, and here's the next image in the sequence. So this is part 1 of the 4 parts. So it did the part 4 first, part 3, then part 1, and then finally it'll finish up with part 2. So I'm going to continue, let this run here, and you'll get the idea of how this is working. All right, we're finishing up part 1, second image. Downloading, and it should display it momentarily. It has. And then what it's going to do is move to the next location, which it already has, and it should start doing the calibration, which it is. So once the guiding is done, it'll start the sequencing again, and this will be the final image. And then we'll have essentially 4 captured images, and let's take a look at the directory structure. Let me bring up Astro Working. We'll go into the Mosaic, and here's your 4 parts. These are the jobs that it places, and here's the first part, and you'll notice there's the light frame, and then there's the two images for part 1. Go to part 3, and you'll see under light there is the 2 images. Now the whole trick of this is once everything's done, the trick is processing these images and creating a mosaic. Like I said, I've used APP to do this, and it works very well for mosaics, and I highly recommend that. I haven't done it with PixInsight. I understand there might be a way to create a mosaic. I might be wrong, but I do know APP does a pretty good job in aligning it and putting it all together. So let's let this thing continue, and then I'll interrupt it again when we're close to the end of the capture with final comments. As we're waiting for this to finish up, here's an example of a mosaic that I did probably a couple of years ago. I used a ASI 178 camera, and this is actually a mosaic of 4 images. The 178 had a fairly narrow field of view, and I was able to create this mosaic. Even though it is a monochrome mosaic, it was an interesting thing to do. And it was one of my first attempts to creating a mosaic, and I was very pleased with the outcome. One thing it's doing right now after the final image, we're down to the last image, and it looks like it met the requirement to focus every 120 minutes. 120 minutes. So I was hoping to get away from doing a focus. But as you can see, it's all automated, and it's going through the focusing right now. And once this gets completed, it will finish up with the next image in the sequence, which will be the last image. So just a note, it does work. Now, as this thing is finishing up, the other thing I'd like to mention is that this scheduler works very well, and as long as you do the pre-testing, proper polar alignment, what I do is before I use the scheduler, I kind of go through and pick a couple of targets, check the guiding, making sure that the guiding works, check to make sure that the astrometric solving works, focusing works, etc., etc. So that's usually the first part of the session when I'm setting up, is I'll go ahead and do a polar alignment, and then go ahead and do various different tests just to get things running and making sure everything is working fine before I create a schedule. And then once I create the schedule, I let it go. I don't kind of babysit. Last time I did that, it worked very well, and I've got an excellent image of NGC 6995, and the Bat Nebula. And I set up and I scheduled it to start after it went through the meridian, and I let it go until very close to the end of, very close to the twilight hours. I was able to get 57 images from that session, and it was nice. I didn't have to worry about it. Everything, parked the telescope, it cooled down the CCD. I woke up in the morning and went out there and put things away. So that really works well if you have a good working setup and you kind of do some pre-checks before you start the scheduler. So I just thought I'd want to bring that up and talk about that just briefly. I could show you the image that I got out of that. Here's that image that I took of NGC 6995 from that evening, and it's still, I'm not quite ready, I'm not totally happy with the processing of it, but it's work in progress. But you could see the detail that it pulled out, and that was all automated via the scheduler, so it was really nice to be able to do that. All right, it's finishing up the final image here, and we're downloading. Let's take a look at the scheduler. It's completed. It's completed. We did the warm-up of the CCD, which basically turns off the power, and it's now parking the telescopes. With that, I think that's the end of the demo and describing how to use a mosaic. I hope you found value with this. It's certainly worth doing if you have a smaller field of view and you're attempting to capture a large object, such as M31 would be a prime candidate for something like this if you needed to have that and your sensor was small enough to where you can't capture the image completely. It also gave you an introduction to using the scheduler. I plan to do more and more scheduling with my system. I find I need sleep. And this really is nice to be able to set things up and go to bed type of thing. And then you could reflect back on the scheduler and how well it performed later on. So anyway, that's it. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please give me a like, a thumbs up. If you want, please subscribe and comment below if you want further information or if you want to see something, but I'm running out of ideas here, and I'm probably going to go back to imaging standard stuff, and I might just do some quick capture sessions and put something together that way. But clear skies to all. Thanks, and have a great rest of the day.